Hello, welcome to Podsongs with me, Jack Stafford, where I interview inspiring people in service to others as inspiration for a new song. I'm now transitioning into Podsongs 2.0 with guest musicians coming on more and more to write songs about their heroes. I've tested this out with a couple of artists before, it's gone really well, and now I'm going to do this a lot. I've did the first 75 songs myself, and I really want to share this experience because it is fantastic to be able to talk to a guest and then write a song about them. And today it's Heather Pierson from America. Unfortunately, there's a bit of timing issues with the Atlantic time differences, and there's other teething problems, which you will hear. Anyway, today's hero is a theoretical physicist, best-selling author, filmmaker, science and public policy advocate, president of the Origins Project, and host of the Origins podcast. Please welcome Lawrence Krauss. Most important thing to remember of the rule of podcast.
Okay. Hi. So it's a little late, but I guess better late than never.
Yeah, we'll just do a slightly shorter interview.
Oh, okay. Was there a problem or?
It was.
Anyway.
I got confused when you said yesterday, so I changed the time an hour later because I thought I got it wrong first time, but I did have it right. So.
Well, okay. It's 7:00 there now, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And so you said changed it to 8?
Yeah, I thought I did, but.
Well, I mean, if you want to do it at 8, if you need to.
No.
We can do it now. Okay, good. Okay, let's do that. I realized that I'd said it was 8 p.m. because you're not on daylight time yet. So
okay.
And we are, and so we sprung forward an hour, and so we're only 8 hours behind you and not 9.
That explains it. Yeah, we changed on Sunday, so.
Yeah, and we changed last week. There's a week or two period where it really screws things up. Same thing happened to me with someone else, where everything's screwed up because you're not on springtime yet. Anyway, let me just close this my mailer so it doesn't beep and stuff. And I've got my special camera, microphones, and lights set up. So
wow, very professional. And what a chair!
Yeah, well, my captain's chair, whatever it is. No, anyway, it's just a chair. It looks like a gamer's chair, but I'm not a gamer. Anyway, okay, good.
Well, the other musician will join us in half an hour or 20 minutes because I told her I changed the time with her as well. So if you see some lady appear, it's not an illusion. Well, because you've always made your work interesting, though. I mean, you started with you've always found a fun way to do things, like with the Star Trek book or
yeah. Well, I like to have a hook. Yeah.
Yeah, that communication aspect. I mean, how can ordinary people make their job so much fun? Because theoretical physicists, I mean, that should be pretty dry, no?
Well, I don't know whether it should be. It often is. I don't think it should be. I don't think it has to be, which is why I do what I do. But I think I find that if I don't enjoy what I'm doing, I don't do it well, and so I always try and do what I enjoy. And I think it's true for most scientists that we not try to save the world when we go into science, and some of the things people develop do maybe save the world, but it's just really because it's fun.
Yeah, but I mean, you've interviewed Johnny Depp. You have your podcast. You have Brian May, Stephen Fry, Ian McEwan. I mean, it's just fascinating people to chat to, no?
Yeah, I'm fortunate to have a lot of pals from different areas, and who have been willing to do it. And it takes. I do my homework. Let me put it that way. It's rather exhausting. I try to read every book that people have written if they've written it. Or in the case of Johnny, who was a good friend, I kind of knew what. I mean, I don't think most people knew the man, and I worked really hard to try and prepare things so people will get a sense of how deep a thinker and reader he is. And anyway, yeah, no, it's that part of these dialogues is fun. I've always tried to mix science and culture. That's been part of my public activities for years and years and years. And And so even, I mean, in my research, obviously my research is what it is, but I think it also has a cultural component. So I've never separated my own life, science and culture. And I like music and I like film and fortunately, for one reason or another, and it's really an accident that I've been able to somehow become involved in both of those things in one way or another. And it makes life more interesting for me. I guess I never like to do just one thing. So, and physics and the kind of science I do is heavily divorced from human issues. Let me put it that way. But I'm a very political um, person, or I'm interested in social issues and have always been. And so I think the doing the other aspects, the writing, speaking out, sort of helped balance my life in that way. And it wasn't a plan, but it just happened.
So you've done TVs, movies, books. Have you ever done music?
Well, let me say that I've tried. Interestingly enough, I have many connections to the music community, or at least the classical music community, in a variety of ways. My daughter was an excellent violinist. Let me say she's a wonderful musician. But I I have no, and I've sort of tried. I've tried piano, mandolin, cello, and I've been equally bad at all of them. But but I will say on my CV, if you look at my CV, it looks like I'm musical. I soloed with the Cleveland Orchestra 6 times. I was nominated for a Grammy. So
No, really?
yeah. Well, that was for writing the liner notes from the music from Star Trek, and they have a liner notes category.
Oh, wow.
And soloing with the Cleveland Orchestra did not require any musical ability. Although my daughter was desperately worried at the time that I might, because what I did was I narrated Holt's The Planets. I wrote a narration and we showed images from NASA. And it was their most popular concerts. I did them outside for 5,000-10,000 people, and then we did a Christmas series. And it's wonderful because there were young kids, and yeah, if you know anything about symphonies, it's harder to. If you look at it, the audience, it's mostly gray and blue
Mm.
hair, and uh, um, and so it was fun to do. But my daughter was desperately worried if I was sinking. But my narration was between each movement. But it was a lot of fun. So anyway, so you see, on paper, I look like a musician.
Yeah, that's. I can't believe you've been nominated for a Grammy. I mean,
Yeah, I just it's kind of yeah. It's what can I say?
yeah, and also you've done, I mean, proper acting. You've been in not just a narrating, or you've been in a real movie.
Yeah, no, I was very fortunate. My friend Werner Herzog, who I've done documentaries with, but and known for some time, said he kind of always wanted me to be a villain in his movie. I always wanted to play a villain,
Why a
and
villain?
he wrote yeah a villain, yeah, and I think it's the most those are the most interesting characters,
Ah,
and he wrote well, not only just a part but a movie basically. I think for me, and I was kind of shocked because I thought I'd be a little minor role, and then he sent me the script and asked me if I would do it, and we filmed in Bolivia, and I'm there's 3 major characters basically in the movie throughout the movie, and Michael Shannon, who's a very well known actor, leads it, and Veronica Ferris is a very well known German actress is the main lead, and there are other people like um, who there are other well known actors in there, in fact, and I was very terrified that I would screw it up for all of them. But it worked out all right in the end. I think. Anyway, Werner liked it.
um,
It was a typical Werner-esque movie. It's a little unusual,
Bolivia.
and
I mean, not just good
yeah.
film in you know, in Wisconsin or somewhere.
No, Werner. As far as I can see, Werner doesn't do anything that's easy. And I think, like me, he chooses things that fulfill something he wants to do. And I think there were various reasons why he wanted to film on these salt flats in Bolivia, and because they're an extraordinary visual experience, and I think that was a key part of it for him. And the rest played into it. It was actually involved a climate issue, in fact, which is maybe now more relevant given my new book. Um, but we filmed it. It was at almost, I guess, it was almost 4,000 meters, and there were some scenes where we had a doctor around at all times with oxygen, and there was one scene involving fighting that a lot of the actors sort of collapsed.
Mm.
And Happily, it depends. I've been at high altitude a number of times, and the reaction is kind of um, random. But
Mm.
in this case, I was fine. I for some reason I was able to exercise and up in Potosi in Bolivia, but it was really an amazing experience filming, especially on the salt flats, because we stayed in a hotel made of salt,
Oh wow.
and and it was a wonder. Well, it was an interesting experience for me to act. I think the fact that I've been in front of a camera a lot really helped, because a key part of acting, at least in movies, I think is sort of ignore the camera, or at least be able to remove yourself from the awareness that there's a camera there in front. You're aware of it, but not fixate on it. And so it was a interesting and very unusual experience, and interesting to see Werner in the role as director, where he was much more terrifying than he was as a friend.
Because you met him at an
I was I
award
was
show.
what was
You
that?
said you met him at an awards show, and then he said you'd be a great villain.
Yeah. Well, no, well, it took some time. I met him at an award show. I was giving, actually, I was at the Sundance Film Festival. Another ridiculous thing that I have been.
Yeah.
I was a judge at the Sundance Film Festival one year,
A dream
which is
job, dream
unusual.
CV. I mean,
It was a dream job in many ways. I never felt more powerful in my life than that week. But people would just move aside for me. But and we gave Werner an award in the category that I was judging, and we became friends. And Werner and Lena, his wife, and I have become good friends over the years. And he has a rogue film school that he's asked me to teach in one day, which is kind of weird. Yeah, and then over the time, he said he thought I could be a villain, and I've always been intrigued by his villainous characters, but I really didn't think it would ever happen. And we were together in Mexico at an event on stage, and I brought it up again, and a year later I got the script, and yeah, in fact, I'll be doing for what it's worth, I'll be doing a podcast with Werner. We'll talk about a lot of things in a couple of weeks, in fact.
wow.
But yeah. Anyway, it was yeah. I've been very fortunate in the hard times in my life, and there have been a few. I reflect on the fact that in spite of those things, I've been incredibly fortunate, and it's not planned so much, but they happen.
So why
and
do
I've
you?
gotten
Why do you? All the scientists. Why is it you? Why are you doing all these fun things?
Well, one never knows, but I think partly it's because I'm open to it.
Okay.
I think that's a key part. I think if for many academics, I've discovered more and more, especially recently, that people don't realize, but academics are extremely timid.
Mm.
And academia is a safe haven for people who are largely not particularly comfortable dealing with the rest of the world. And it's just not the way I am. I'm not. In fact, that was a hard part of academia for me. Detaching from the world is something that I don't do well, and so I think the fact that I was open to it, and in some sense, I've sought out throughout my life. I've sought out opportunities. I plant seeds, and you never know what's going to come. So I planted a lot of seeds, and a lot of them haven't gone anywhere, but other ones have, and so. And then I follow them, and you don't know where they're going to lead. And that's part of, for me, the joy of life, is that you don't know what you're doing next. And it's true in my research as well. I've always said when when you apply for a grant, you always lie because you say what you're going to be doing in the next 3 years. And I always think if I know what research I'm going to be doing 3 years from now, it's pretty sad.
Yeah, you wouldn't have to do it
For me. Well, yeah. Well, some people. To be fair, there's some people who are with research programs that are 20 or 30 years long, and they're built up. But I'm just not that way. I would sort of follow whatever's what interesting ideas that I had, or interesting developments or discoveries in science. And so, you'd invent this scenario, this narrative that was kind of a myth of what you might do, and then you did do things. And so, people ask, well, does it take time out of your research? Of course it does, but for me, I just don't know whether I could do it if I wasn't balancing the two, and one makes the other more interesting. My writing, I've had thoughts about physics and physics projects that have resulted from my writing, because you think about things differently, and then the other life experiences are just grand, and it's also opened me up to realize, if you're someone like me whose life has been in academia for most of their life, and I've always treasured ideas and writing, and you tend to become kind of effete in the sense of the presumptuous notion that the most intelligent people in the world are in academia, and that's just simply not true. Neither the most intelligent nor creative people I've met in my life have been in academia. And I mean, there's some incredible people I know, colleagues and friends. But what an eye-opening thing for me, and I'm embarrassed to say that it took me a long time in my life to realize that, hey, there are people who may never gone to school who are just amazing in their abilities, and I've got to meet some of them, and that's a wonderful thing to open up and to realize that, and in some sense, it takes more courage to strike out on your own and do things without the support of the entire academic institution that academics have. They found the grants, it's a pretty easy life if you're in fact, it's an incredibly cushy life as an academic. Not that, and let me say that before people jump to conclusions. I think many people who are academics are slave labor, and in a case they're underpaid and they don't. If you're fortunate, I was fortunate to be in a position to be able to do a lot and have a lot of support. But in any case, that cloistered environment is more and more, in my mind, is really can help, can be cause stagnation in some sense. Mm-hmm. And anyway, that's one of the reasons I was actually thinking for a long time, ultimately, as much as I enjoy my science, about that that I wanted to try and strike out and do some things outside academia. I obviously did them while I was at a university, and that was fun to be able to sort of match the two things, and it's nice. But then to try different things, and without having the burden, especially now the burden of a bureaucracy, because especially the United States, American institutions and American education is really in a sad situation where the things that made it fun, the ability to ask questions, the ability to openly discuss, all of that is dying now, and it's really an environment that's unfortunate. And so I decided I'm happier to be in a position without having to deal with all of that institutional bureaucracy and work out and strike out on my own, where I can basically do what I want and whether people like it or not.
So, because you have these both worlds. I mean, because you have done the deep thinking. I mean, you almost won a Nobel Prize for your work on dark energy now. And when you imagine that kind of stuff, you imagine someone like Dawkins or Hawkins or someone like that, Stephen Hawkins, doing with no communication abilities, and he was you have to really go in a dark room for that kind of stuff, or what? It doesn't.
No, that's the people illusion. I mean, Stephen, by the way, was a friend for many years and actually wrote the foreword for one of my books. But people have this illusion that it's all done in a dark room in the middle of the night with these wonderful realizations, and I think Einstein is the problem. But even the point is, it's a very social, I don't know whether social enterprise, but it's a group enterprise. A lot of the work, if you're not in touch with what's happening in the scientific community, with what's going on, it's really hard. It's very rare that people, who aren't in touch can make any significant impact. And even Einstein, who worked on his own, was incredibly in touch with experiment and never could have done what he did if he didn't know what was going on in experiment and observation. And so, I've been fortunate in my scientific career to be able, and I guess obviously having some ability to be able to be to find myself in situations to be able to work with really good people, and be sort of at the apex of where things were happening. I was lucky enough to go to a very good graduate school and then get a job at Harvard after that, which was a very exciting environment at that time to work in. And I've always, so my colleagues and my students have been an incredibly important part of my activities. And so it's very rare to have a solitary scientist. In fact, most of the time that they end up doing wacko things. And I think that's an illusion that people have. it's true that, I've always done in many ways my best work. I don't know the best work is to say it, but most intense work in the middle of the night. I just happen to be a vampire, as my friend Johnny Depp says, because he is. And uh, and sure, I like the middle of the night, but then and the reason I like the middle of the night is that's when I kind of can do some concerted work, because during the day I'm interacting with people, but those interactions are incredibly important, bouncing ideas off the blackboard or arguing, or I remember, I did actually a podcast with a now friend and in some sense earlier mentor Shelley Glashow, who won a Nobel Prize in physics. And I remember when I was at Harvard, he would come into my office and, he'd be yelling at me, and that's how we were doing it. Oh, no, you idiot, and that's how we would do science during the day. And sometimes I think I did that with my students. I'd shake them up, and say, hey, come on, and so it's kind of a fun give and take. But that give and take is really important. And nowadays more than ever, science is a community enterprise, because big science is kind of essential. The easy questions, the low-hanging fruit in some sense, were handled already. And to ask the deeper questions about nature require much more money and work and organization. And if you're experimentalist now, it's rare to be able to have do your own experiment. You're part of experiments involve not just hundreds, but thousands of people. But it's true even in theory that often large collaborations are necessary to do the complex work with different people doing different components. And I've done all kinds of it, just working on my own and working with a small group. And then now I'm actually part, which is fun for me. I've proposed experiments and observations, as you argue, but and some of the experiments that are now being done are based on ideas. I'm happy to say that we proposed 30 or 40 years ago, but I'm actually part of a big experimental collaboration now, which is the first time I've been part of that, and it's kind of a fun, different experience.
Oh, right, because the work you did was 3 years after that. It did win a Nobel Prize, no? So, but if that happened,
well, look, not the work I did, but the work, obviously, the work that people who won the Nobel Prize work. They were observers. I had and a colleague had proposed that there was something crazy about the universe, that the only way to explain observations was if the dominant energy in the universe resided in empty space where there was nothing. And it was a crazy idea, and I spoke about it all around the world, in fact, and people would smile politely. And in fact, one of the people on the collaboration that eventually won the Nobel Prize, Saul Perlmutter, when I spoke, I spent 6 weeks at Lawrence Berkeley Lab, and I gave a lecture promoting this idea, and he said, we're going to prove you wrong. And he didn't. And then the observers went out, and to be fair, they weren't impacted by what I was saying, they were looking for in a large part for something else. And even though we were right, it didn't govern what they were doing. They were doing a set of observations, and they discovered to their surprise after the fact that we were right. So. And so that, it's important to think, I don't know, Nobel Prizes are arbitrary anyway, as are all prizes, but generally they go to people who somehow sort of convince the world, and no one believed that an empty space was the dominant energy in the universe until the observers discovered it by accident, to be sure, but they built the tools to be able to do it, and that building the tools was a key part of that discovery. And it's amazing how quickly after that observation, so our paper came out in 1995. They made the observations in 1998, 1999, and within 6 months, the world of physics anyway had accepted that reality. And I think they won the prize in 2011 or something. But people were primed by then to realize there was a problem, and that solved the problem. But it was amazing how quickly the community did accept that result. And maybe our work to help to some extent helped prime the community, but it was really the observations that changed everything. And that's important. Science is, again, the theorists get all the press, because it sounds sexy and romantic to be sitting in the middle of the night having these realizations about it. Yeah, exactly. But physics, and all science, but physics is an empirical discipline, and it's really the experiments that drive the field, not the theory. And it's experiments, because what determines what's right is not whether someone's a Nobel Prize winner or a brilliant scientist or a nice guy or an awful guy or woman or whatever. It's whether nature agrees with it. I mean, and it's nature that determines what's right. And the only way to know that is to go out and keep looking. And that's why experiments have to continue. If you stop doing experiments, if you locked up theorists in a room for 30 years and asked them to come up with a theory of the world, and ask one of them, she might say, she'd come up with some idea, but it would have nothing to do with reality. It wouldn't even be science fiction. It's the experiments that keep scientists honest.
So you were heretical at the time then? You did challenge the...
Oh, yeah, I've always been heretical.
Yeah.
Well, I like to be heretical. I don't know that I've always been heretical. But that was definitely a challenge to the accepted wisdom. There's no doubt about that. But that's part of the fun of it, I think. And I continue to do that. And in science, in the kind of science I do, which has little impact on humanity, you're free to be heretical. Unfortunately, what's happened more and more is in many other areas of science that do have some connection to the human condition, you're not free to be heretical anymore. You're not free to ask questions that you want. And that disturbs me greatly. And I've written about that lately. It's just very sad that you can't ask. If you ask questions, your career is over. That's the end of science if that continues.
So wasn't that a huge thing to point out, though? Is it 96% of the energy in the universe is you didn't know was there?
Yeah, well, I pointed, but let me make it clear. I pointed it out. I was sure it was wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I think even I would notice that.
But what the purpose of doing that was to say that, hey, look, all the observations only agree if this is the case. So therefore, some of the observations must be wrong.
So what is it? Well, the observation is the way the universe is expanding, or what,
well, no, these were indirect observations. If you combine together the different observations of measurements of the cosmic microwave background, the radiation from the Big Bang, measurements of the amount of dark matter in the universe and the composition of the amount of normal matter in the universe, the measurements of structure formation, how gravity causes things to form. If you put them together and applied some theory, the different results gave inconsistent answers.
Okay.
If you assume the universe was flat, which was a theoretical postulate at the time,
the Earth,
which we accepted as theorists, but it turned out the universe was flat, and so one of the ways out is to say the universe wasn't flat, but we were pretty convinced it was. And anyway, if you tried them all together, they didn't fit. So, there were 5 or 6 different inputs into that, including theory. And so something was wrong with either the fundamental theory or some of the experiments. And so we said, look, in order for them to agree, then you have to, the universe, if it's flat, then 70% of the energy in the universe has to reside in empty space where there's nothing. Get rid of particles and radiation and everything else. And so there's absolutely nothing, but it weighs something. Right. Okay, there was an idea of Einstein's originally, which he said was his biggest blunder, that empty space can have energy, and he wished he'd never thought of it, but it turned out to be true. We should all have such blunders, but
just one of his throwaway ideas. Oh, I made here's one.
Well, he didn't understand. Well, to be fair, he didn't understand it. He made both a mathematical mistake, and he really didn't understand the physics because it wasn't yet developed enough for him to realize what that. Because he didn't really understand. Well, he understood, but he didn't accept quantum mechanics. But in any case, that notion that empty space had energy then had an implication, which is that if you put energy in empty space, the universe will expand faster and faster. And that was what the people discovered in 1998, looking at the expansion of the universe. And I kind of wish in our 1995 paper we had said, hey, do this set of observations to show this. I didn't think I'm not sure we trusted that you could do those observations. So I'd actually written, now that I look back, I'd actually written other papers about how to do such observations. I realized after the fact I'd forgotten about that, but I wish we had, in a way, because it would have seemed more like a prediction. And I don't think the Nobel Committee would have changed their mind anyway. But because it was the observations that, as I said, really were the significant development. But it was an implication, and so so they measured the expansion rate of the universe and discovered indeed the universe is speeding up, and it turned out. Guess what? We were exactly right. 70% of the energy of the universe appears to be flat. 70% resides in empty space, about 25% in this weird stuff called dark matter. And The rest is the normal stuff, the stuff that makes you and I up and everything we see.
Hmm.
Even most of that is not visible, it turns out, and we're now trying to discover where it's hidden. So it's an interesting universe. We still don't know, and we don't know what the dark matter is made of, and that have been a subject of my own research for much of my career. Both figuring out the candidates for it. I proposed candidates and explored their implications, and also proposed the experiments that are now being done to look for them. One of which I'm now on.
What about matter in different frequencies of vibration, like a different spectrum, the electromagnetic spectrum? What about different?
The electromagnetic spectrum is not matter; it's radiation. Photons don't have mass, and so we call matter basically stuff that can be at rest. Photons can't be at rest because something at zero mass can never travel slower than the speed of light. So what matter is something that basically can be at rest, and moreover can collapse in a gravitational field, and that's why we have galaxies and stars and planets and you and I.
But
dark matter can
we're
collapse.
Solidified sunlight, no?
No. We're not solidified sunlight. Sunlight excites us. It excites me on a sunny day here in Oregon, especially. But so it provides the energy for matter to be able to transform its states, which is an essential part of metabolism. But no, there's a fundamental difference between sunlight or radiation and matter. You can convert between the two. So things that are very different in science can be really different manifestations of the same thing. In this case, energy. Just like something and nothing are very different in classical philosophy, but in physics, they're not really very different. Nothing could turn into something, as I've written a whole book about.
Yeah.
But matter is something fundamentally different than radiation, and something fundamentally different than the energy of empty space. But matter can come in various forms. The matter that makes you and I up can interact with radiation, so we can see sunlight, but dark matter is a kind of matter that doesn't interact with electromagnetic radiation, doesn't interact with sunlight, so it's dark. We don't know what it is. We think it's a new type of elementary particle, and there are lots of good candidates. I suspect we'll discover the nature of dark matter maybe in the next decade or two. Dark energy is a much different thing, the energy of empty space. I'll be surprised if we understand that. It's going to be a long slog. We may need to have a quantum theory of gravity. It's going to be a long time. Could be 20 years, could be 200 years, could be 2,000 years. I don't know.
But do we have to think in terms of particles? Talking of scientists away from the mainstream, Tesla had that famous quote that to understand the universe, think in terms of frequency, energy, and vibration, something like that.
Well, Tesla was an interesting guy, but he wasn't. How can I say this? He was a very creative man who was probably misunderstood and not given sufficient credit for some of the things he did. But he didn't. As a scientist, he didn't push the scientific community. He didn't make any great discoveries about the fundamental nature of the electromagnetic field that weren't in some ways already understood or anything else. So it's nice of him to say that, but to explore. I mean, look, any kind of quote you can always find validation for. Often, I'm amazed especially lately, when people quote the Quran to me and say, "See, the Quran understood all of science," and it's some vague quote which you can interpret a million different ways. Well, it's true. If you want to think in terms of frequencies, it's very useful because matter exchanges energy with radiation by electrons jumping between different orbits and emitting or absorbing light of given frequency. So every material has what's called a spectrum, which is like a fingerprint, a unique set of frequencies of light that it can absorb or emit, which is, again, I talk about at length now lately because of carbon dioxide and climate change, as I discussed in the new book. And that's very important. The carbon dioxide absorbs in the infrared. Oxygen doesn't. And that plays a key role in governing our climate. So yes, you can think in terms of frequencies, but I think you can't read too much into what Tesla said.
But if you have dark energy and dark matter, so there's chicken and egg, which comes first?
Probably neither. First you have to, as Carl Sagan once said, if you want to make an omelet, first, create a universe. And that's the recipe. And so first you have to get space and time, and that's a challenge. And I discussed that. the way the universe evolved is that the current dark energy we're seeing now only became kind of significant gravitationally relatively recently in the history of the universe. Well, by recently, I mean about 5 billion years ago. The universe is, 13 or 14 billion years old, 13.8 billion years old, but about 5 billion years ago is when the dark matter began to govern the dynamics of the universe. Before that, if it's the form we think it was largely irrelevant. And so matter and radiation were the dominant players that governed the early history of the universe, we think. And so, if you wish, the important stuff was, first, it was radiation. It was particles moving at the speed of light. That really governed the early history of the universe. And then when the universe was about somewhere, actually probably around a million years old, the matter began to dominate the energy density of the universe, the stuff that was standing still. And that the gravitational energy of matter began to determine the dynamics of how the universe evolved. And then, as I say, 7 billion years after that is when dark energy began to become important, and it's dominant now. And it's strange in some ways that the energy density of empty space and the energy density of matter are not too different. One, it's sort of 3 to 1, and that was not lost on me when I first started to think about it. And I even proposed ways that they could be related, and other people have, but I don't, we don't have any good ideas that really explain that. It is interesting that we are living in a rather unique time in the history of the universe. If dark energy is what it is, we think it is, this is the only time in the history of the universe when those two numbers, the energy of empty space and the energy of matter, are about the same. In the far future, the energy density of matter will be far less than the energy density of empty space. And in the distant past, the energy density of matter was much greater. Is that significant? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe it's an accident.
For these predictions and for also for judging the age of the universe, 13.8 billion years, do you rely on these fundamental constants in physics?
We don't. Well, we measure. We rely on things that we can test. That's the only thing we rely on. And it turns out the fundamental constants of nature can be tested. They are constant as far as we can tell. They haven't varied much at all since the early history of the universe. We can test that idea. But there are fundamental constants: the speed of light, the strength of electromagnetism, strength of gravity, all of which have been tested at different levels of accuracy to not vary by, in the case of electromagnetism, by parts in 100,000 between now and when the universe was a second old, and the speed of light, again, we can measure to 10 decimal places.
Because they measure it, there's metrology, isn't it? They measure it every year, and I think between 1928 and 1945, the speed of light it dropped by about 20 kilometers per second. Which is quite
well, it didn't drop. The measurement of it, but 20 kilometers a second sounds like a lot if you're running, but if you're the speed of light, it's not a lot. The speed of light in kilometers per second is something like 300,000 kilometers per second. So 20 kilometers per second is not. I don't know if it really changed by that much, but in any case, now we can measure it to better than a meter per second, much better than a meter per second.
Well, the meter is originally based on the speed of light now.
Well, now we do. In fact, yeah. Originally, the kilogram and the meter, used to be these literally metal bars that were in a place in Paris that said, here's a standard meter, it's a ruler, and here's a standard kilogram, it's a kilogram of whatever material it was. But now those aren't very useful ways of determining because they're not related to fundamental quantities. And so now you can relate the meter and the kilogram to fundamental quantities of time and space having to do with frequencies. You're right, with the frequency of motion of atoms, which you can measure to 13 or 14 decimal places. And that's why metrology then relies on that. In fact, we can measure time now at some lot better than 1 part in 10 to the 18th, 1 part in a billion.
But big G also varies by about 1.3% in recent years.
What do you mean when you say vary? You don't really mean vary. You mean the measurement of it.
Yeah.
I 25 years ago showed that big G, the strength of gravity, can't have changed by more than 50% between now and the time when the universe was 1 second old. So we know it can't have varied much. But yeah, it's the hardest thing to measure. G is the hardest thing to measure because gravity is the weakest force in nature.
Gravitational waves
So that's why,
as you go, the Earth travels through the...
well, gravitational waves give us, I mean, now we have wonderful new measures that allow us to test gravity. Gravitational waves are one thing. In fact, I'm going to do a podcast with a friend of mine, Barry Barish, who won the Nobel Prize for the discovery of gravitational waves in a few weeks. And it's changed everything about, it's given us a whole new window on the universe, but it doesn't change the fact that gravity is the weakest force in nature, and therefore gravitational effects are incredibly hard to measure compared to, say, electromagnetic effects, the light, which is easy to measure. And we're doing it right now by my camera, looking into it and talking to you.
This conversation is constant. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's possible because we can manipulate light and measure it so well. We have a device inside the camera I'm looking at called a CCD that basically, when light comes in, certain electrons get excited and give an electrical signal that's stored and can be transmitted over the wire that goes into my computer, and then that's transmitted by in turn sending out electromagnetic waves to the server that is storing this information and communicating it to you, and vice versa. It's an amazing world we live in because of the fact that matter and electromagnetic waves interact so strongly and in a way that we can understand. The best theory of nature is called quantum electrodynamics, which is the theory of the interaction of matter and radiation, and it allows us to predict things at a level of 1 part in a million billion and compare them to experiment, and they agree. There's no other place in science where you can make a fundamental prediction to 13 decimal places and have it agree with observation.
Okay. I also heard you said that science is not about proving things so much as disproving things.
Yeah, well, that's true. You can't prove something to be absolutely true. What you can prove is that what you can say is, I did this experiment and this idea works, but there may be an experiment down the road that's a little more sophisticated that finds you have to change the idea. And take gravity. It's a good example. Newton's law of gravity works. It works very well. It's not wrong. It's great for cannonballs or even rocket ships go around the Earth. You don't need to use, for the most part, anything else. But we now know at the extremes of scale, at the very fast speeds or very, very large distances, and huge amounts of mass, then Newton's law of gravity has to be refined into what's called general relativity. And the question is whether general relativity would need to be refined. So what you can prove is something to be absolutely false, because if you have an idea and it disagrees with an experiment, then it's wrong. End of story. Throw it out. You don't have to continue to think about it. But just because a theory survives experiment doesn't mean it's absolute. In fact, as far as we can now know, no theory describes nature perfectly at all scales. Even QED, the quantum electrodynamics, which is, as I say, the best theory we have, it breaks down our theory of just electrons and photons breaks down as a fundamental theory at a scale 1/1000th the size of a proton or so, and has to be refined into what's called the electroweak theory, which was discovered. And similarly, so we think that no theory describes nature on all scales. It's always an approximation. And that's fine. And as scientists, we realize that. And I think that's really an important aspect of scientific truth that's not widely understood. I wrote about it in one of my books, Fear of Physics, because I think it's probably the biggest misunderstanding about science is people think scientific truth is absolute, and it's not. It can be refined. That doesn't mean we throw it all out. I mean, then people think, well, the other big misunderstanding is, oh, well, because science evolves, then what we think is true now will one day be false. And that's not true. Whatever theory we have, general relativity has to reduce to Newton's laws, because Newton's laws are right. So it can't predict that if I let a ball go, it's going to fall up. Okay? So the theories that have survived the test of experiment are not going to go away. They're just going to be subsumed in perhaps more fundamental theories. And so it's not as if we're going to suddenly think the universe is 6,000 years old when we now think it's 13.8 billion years old, or that balls will fall up, or, so it's a big misunderstanding that people think scientific revolutions do away with everything that went before them. They don't do that at all. Neither do real human revolutions, it turns out, either, but that's a different subject.
I had Sean Carroll on the show as well earlier, and he was talking about Everett's many worlds theory.
Yeah, well, I think I mean, I think that's a waste of time, frankly. It sounds good to talk about it, but I mean, it's just a classical interpretation of quantum mechanics, and it's fascinating in a way to think about and talk about. But it's just the world is quantum mechanical, and if you want to understand it classically, you're going to have to come up with weird pictures. But as my friend, late friend, a much more accomplished physicist, say Sean Carroll, that was Sidney Coleman at Harvard. He's now deceased. He was probably the smartest person at Harvard, certainly when I was there. And that included a lot of my colleagues who were friends who were Nobel Prize winners who would have agreed with me on that statement, I should say. But he said the proper thing to talk about is not the interpretation of quantum mechanics, it's the interpretation of classical mechanics, because the world is quantum mechanical. So we should try and understand how the classical world we see is explained in terms of quantum mechanics, rather than invent these kind of weird approximations that help you classically understand the weirdness of quantum mechanics, but they're all an approximation. So it's true that if I tried to think of any classical approximation of quantum mechanics, Everett's many worlds theory, which is probably the best picture. By the way, it's not new; it's 60 years old, or 70 years old now. And I was kind of surprised that it suddenly, people he chose to talk about it now as if it was something new and exciting. It's been around for a long time, and most physicists say, "Yeah, that's a good picture," but then they ignore it because it is irrelevant to doing experiments.
But it's like you talk about Sherlock Holmes. You eliminate all and you're left with the one thing. It doesn't sound to me like when you do that, just because you based an experiment based on the way that protons go through two slits, that's the only possible explanation. I mean, what about consciousness?
Well, it's not. Well, they're not always only one possible explanation. There are many, and you try and test the ones that you have to see which one you keep testing. If an experiment allows many possible interpretations, then you try and test those interpretations by other experiments. And consciousness has nothing to do with the double slit experiment. You don't have to be around. No one has to be around for there to be a double slit.
If they're conscious, the particles or the protons.
Well, now you're sounding like Deepak Chopra, who somehow thinks particles are conscious. There's no evidence of. First of all, consciousness is a complex and not well understood phenomenon.
Where do you stand?
We don't even understand human. We don't even understand human consciousness. I've talked to neuroscientists in my podcast about that as well. I mean, defining consciousness is a very difficult thing. But one thing is quite clear is that it requires a very complex interplay between lots of things in our brain to get the what we now call self-awareness and consciousness. And it's not clear where in the animal kingdom that level of complexity arises sufficiently to have consciousness.
But do you think consciousness just
but it's
comes
clear
from
that
the
an
brain?
electron. Yeah, you cut off your head, you're not conscious. Yeah, it arises in our brain. Clearly, it arises for a series of chemical and physical reactions between neurons that we don't understand. A collective phenomena that's very complicated, but it's collective. It involves this complex system, and an electron is about as not complex as you can imagine. And so to argue that somehow individual particles have consciousness is to argue something without any basis in fundamental theory, and everything you can know about nature suggests the opposite.
Because
I'm sorry to burst your bubble, but I know it sounds good, but it doesn't make any sense to me.
No, because I mean, arguing with someone, many scientists, dismiss consciousness, and arguing with a conscious being that they're not. Arguing against their own consciousness is a difficult thing.
So I certainly don't want to dismiss consciousness. It's incredibly important, and I think it's probably one of the most important, not well understood concepts, outstanding puzzles in nature. If I had to think about the different puzzles in science, there's some at the fundamental scale, gravity and quantum mechanics and the nature of the universe, things that I've explored. But the other realm is the realm of the brain and consciousness. I think it's the other most outstanding puzzle in science. And in fact, by the way, when I was younger, that was what I thought I wanted to do. I wanted to study what would be now called neuroscience. I didn't know it was called neuroscience. My parents didn't go to finish high school, and so I thought I'd be a brain surgeon. I thought that was the way to understand consciousness. That's what I wanted to do till I was 16 or 17.
Well, consciousness is a big topic, and you've debated it with many people much smarter than me, so I won't.
Well, I haven't debated it. I wish I just don't understand. I guess what I would argue is that we don't. I want to learn about it, and when I talk to people who study it, what's clear is that there's a lot we have to learn about what it is, and so I like to ask questions. That's an area, by the way, one of the few areas where maybe one could say philosophers play a role in science, because framing good questions is something philosophy is good at, and in an area where we don't understand much, framing good questions is important. So consciousness is an area that where sort of science and philosophy tend to mesh a little bit more. Not physics anymore, because the good questions are framed by physicists and not philosophers. So in earlier times they were, but when physics was a nascent field, it was quite different.
Okay, well, before you go, I want to ask you about one more area, and I know you did the work on the doomsday clock. Because you say you didn't work to save the world, but I mean that's pretty. And we're now is it 100 seconds to midnight, which is the clock the most we've ever been.
The doomsday clock is now tied for. It hasn't moved in the last year. The closest it's ever been. It's now measured in terms of seconds, and that's just because of real estate. Yeah, I was involved. Sure, I mean, the science I do wasn't designed to save the world, but as someone who's interested in people and society, I've tried periodically to do what I can to have an impact, and from the time I was a student, when I was a student at MIT, I was very interested in the Bull atomic scientists, because there were scientists that I really admired who had been involved from the Manhattan Project on, trying to realize how nuclear weapons are a problem and we need to be able to deal with them, and help the world understand that they're a problem and how to deal with. And so I was quite honored at some level later on when I was asked to be on the board of sponsors of the bulletin, and it was very useful for me as a scientist, because when I became chairman of the board of sponsors, around that time the bulletin changed its focus from being completely on nuclear weapons to look more broadly at other existential risks, and we included climate change for the first time. In retrospect, I've wondered whether it was a good idea, but we included it, but every year when deciding on this quote doomsday clock, which is the state of the world, to try and alert the world to existential problems, human-induced existential problems, we would have a doomsday symposium where we'd bring in experts. And so I got sort of 12 years of tutorials from experts on everything from bioterrorism and biotechnology to climate change. And that was really relevant for me later on when I wrote this book on climate change, to have had this training in some sense and people to turn to further my own understanding. And yeah, I think it's important. Look, I think science, not all scientists have a responsibility to try and reach the public and help public utilize science in a way that's good for society. But I think science as a discipline has that responsibility. And so it relies on certain scientists who are willing to be involved. And I was one of those people who are willing to be involved. But I certainly don't think every scientist should be forced to I mean, the best thing a scientist can do if they're good in science is do science. And then, if they're interested in interacting with the public, popularizing, educating, sure, they should be involved and encouraged to do that. But there are a lot, as I say, there are a lot of my colleagues I want to keep away from the public.
But for those 12 years on that committee, I mean, it must have been a nightmare scenario. And so, obviously,
during the days when we debated what the doomsday clock should be, was always kind of a depressing experience is one way of putting it. It's not a scientific thing. It's not like, it's very subjective, right? It's just looking at all these things and saying, do we think we're safer or not? Also, frankly, it's political, saying, well, do we think so? And what should we say to have the biggest impact? And that's why I'm kind of less enamored, but 100 seconds. Why? Well, that's because 2 minutes, which it was before, or 1 minute, what do you do? If you say that we're at 1 minute, you don't have much room to move forward, right? We used to move the clock by minutes at a time. When it's been, I think the farthest it was when I was chair was 7 minutes to midnight. We moved it back at one point, and I think that was as far as it was. Maybe it was a little further at some point. But we used to use it, move it by a minute or two to sort of, it was a symbolic movement. But then when it's 1 or 2 minutes, I remember the meetings. We'd say, "Well, look, we don't have much real estate. Maybe we shouldn't move it this year." And so it's governed by many things, and to pretend it's scientific is to really misunderstand it. It's really a symbol to try and point out to the world once each year there are deep global existential issues that people need to think about that we ignore generally. And nuclear weapons are one, and for a long time climate change was another. And so it was useful, and that's why I was interested as an educator in using that. And I spoke out as a spokesman for that organization because I knew how to do that, to try and get people to think about it and discuss it for one day a year. And maybe then they learn more about it. And so as an educational tool, I think it was useful, but I think it's often misinterpreted.
But is climate change, so it's obviously important because you've written a book about it, but is if climate change is here, is nuclear, in terms of danger, is it because it's still an ever-present threat?
Well, I think they're very different. Nuclear weapons are such that we could end civilization as we know it in a day.
Yeah.
Or less, and they're huge dangers. And as Einstein said 75 years ago, everything has changed save the way we think, and we still haven't changed the way we think. Climate change is not the same kind of threat. It's no matter what some people on the left in the United States say, the world is not going to end in a decade if we don't do anything about climate change. Okay,
no.
Some people say that, and that's really unfortunate. It's a slow, gradual process that's going to make the world worse in some places. And cause hardship for many people, and will produce threats to the current way we operate. But it's a long-term problem that we can maybe address in many ways technologically. It's a global issue, but it's not a threat, an immediate threat in the sense that nuclear weapons are. And that's part of my problem of sort of having included it in that sense. Now, it's an urgent subject, and one of the biggest misunderstandings people have on the right about this is that they say, look, life is good here. Why, you've been moaning climate change, but it hasn't affected me, and the world hasn't changed that much. And that's true. Well, yeah, well, but part of the problem is you can't, you've got to be careful attributing certain things to climate change. And, Simon claims it's statistical. It's saying there'll be more extreme weather events statistically, but you can't say this fire or that storm was due to it. But the reason it's urgent to deal with is not because tomorrow it's going to kill you. It's because of this effect that I've called the Las Vegas effect. What happens in the atmosphere stays in the atmosphere. The fact that the carbon that we put up in the atmosphere is going to stay there, not for a decade, not for a century, but for a millennium. And after 1,000 years, 60% of it is still up there. And because it accumulates, every year we don't do something, we're adding 10 billion tons, 10 gigatons of carbon into the atmosphere. And that means more carbon we have to deal with, and the effects of which will add up over time. So the reason we need to do something now is because every year we don't do something, it makes it harder down the road to ameliorate what will be a much more severe problem if we keep adding carbon.
So what was the premise of your new book?
Well, the premise is that basically it's just about the science. First of all, the science of climate change is fascinating. It's also basic. Anyone can understand the basic science. Doesn't rely on supercomputer models or all the things that people say. And there's certain things that are written in stone that are happening now. Climate change is happening now. But the idea is basically, look, I don't talk about policy there. I just say, if we're going to have sensible public policy, we need to understand the science and what predictions are well determined, what the predictions are less well determined. And we need to understand that as a first step, a preliminary step, if we're all going to develop reasonable policy. So I wanted to write a book that anyone, regardless of their political persuasion, could at least understand the science and what the fundamental predictions are. And then we can go to the next step and say, what should the policies be? And I think it's important that I'm not a climate scientist, and I wrote such a book because, if I can't, as a scientist, a theoretical physicist who also spent a lot of time explaining things to people, if I can't both understand and explain climate change, then there's not much hope for a rational public discussion. And so that was the idea.
Okay. All right. Well, I have to condense all this down into a song. So, is there a particular headline issue that you would like me to focus on?
I think the challenge should be on you, not me. I'm just, when I'm doing a podcast, the challenge on me is to put it all together.
Yeah, but you don't
This
write
is
you don't
your
write a song at the end of your podcast. I've listened to
No,
it.
I don't. I don't. I mean, I'm shocked and still in. We'll see. I'm always skeptical. We'll see what happens. but I guess the themes that are common to what we talked about is that the universe is stranger. It has a greater imagination than we do, and that we have to keep exploring it. We have to keep questioning it in order to keep moving forward, because nature determines what's right, not us, and that we have to keep be willing to change our mind, and that the challenge of being human means being able to accept that you don't understand things as well. So those are some common themes. But anyway, now over to you.
All right. Thanks very much, Lawrence. It's been a real pleasure.
Well, it's been a pleasure. I didn't know where we were going to head. I had no idea what this was going to be about or what we were going to do. So I didn't even realize at the beginning that we were actually recording it. I think at the beginning. So it'll be interesting to see how this. I'll have to go back and see the beginning of this conversation.
No.
And I'll be interested to see what song results.
Yeah. Well, because I thought because I know from the work with Richard Dawkins as well. I'm pro spiritualist, like a Rupert Sheldrake supporter.
Uh-huh.
You have the Dark Knight and the White Prince on the difference. So
okay, well, we can always disabuse you of those notions over time, but that's okay.
But you seem to have mellowed since those days. I mean, maybe you're an anti.
Well, I guess some people say yeah. Maybe I've mellowed. I hope I haven't mellowed too much. I have another friend of mine. In a joke, Woody Allen said in the movie that he didn't do yoga because he didn't want to mellow, because then he'd ripen and then rot. and yeah, I guess I've mellowed. I've come to I think over life I've come to not only be more willing to be wrong, but to realize that there's things to be gained from understanding what's worth worrying about and not worth worrying about, and that it's worth sometimes even listening to other people, something I wasn't particularly good at when I was younger.
Well, Heather's just joined us. Are you there, Heather?
I am. I was hanging out in a Google Meet room for much longer than I needed to, so I apologize for being late.
Well, I've got good news and bad news for you, I'm afraid.
Okay.
The bad news is we've just finished the interview. But the good news is you get to say hello to Lawrence.
Hello, Lawrence.
Yeah, hello, Heather. I'm sorry that we did this when you weren't there, and there was a screw up in time. It's just amazing in this modern world that we can't get our time straight. But I'm part of the problem. Part of the problem is that we have daylight savings time in the United States and not yet in Europe, and that moves things off by an hour for about 2 weeks during the year.
Yeah.
During which people like us get screwed up. It's the second time that's happened to me in 2 weeks.
Wow.
But I was very happy to learn that you would be involved, and I was eager to see I was just beginning to learn about your music, and so now I feel very sad that I didn't get to spend more time with you at least on the air virtually.
I'm very sad too. It brings to mind a question I wanted to ask you.
Sure.
Something I've been pondering very deeply lately is this notion of possibility. Mm-hmm. And from not just from a poetic standpoint, I think of thinking about possibility as, something that as a songwriter, it's something I'm considering all the time. But from a physicist's point of view, is possibility actually a thing, or is there only the actual? Does that make sense?
Look. Oh yeah, it makes sense. And I've written about this. I mean, I often say, I mean, that's what I get paid to do, is think about possibilities. I don't get paid to think about what's practical. And as people around me will recognize, I may not worry about what's practical very often. I get to think about what are the possibilities of the universe. And what's really exciting, the reason I'm a scientist, is that the possibilities of the universe are far greater than those that I can imagine. The imagination of the universe is far greater than that of human beings, which is why we have to keep, as I was saying to Jack, we have to keep looking out. We have to keep doing experiments, because what determines what's what's real is not our ideas of what's beautiful or what we like or what makes us happy. It's what nature determines. And so the possibilities of the universe are remarkable, which means at the same time, you don't need all the nonsense. You don't need all this, forgive me, Jack, spiritual nonsense or religious nonsense. The real universe is plenty interesting enough. Those possibilities are just amazing, and they're awe-inspiring. And I think your job and my job aren't that different when we think about possibilities. And that's what I was saying earlier, Jack. My whole life tried to connect science and culture, and I don't see the job of a theoretical physicist as very different than that of a painter or a musician or a dramatist. They're all trying to sort of force us to re-examine our place in the cosmos and who we are. So how does this work? You forgive me. Do you guys then spend time thinking about a song and then produce it, or do you do it on the spur of the moment? The reason I'm asking
you're not going to do a song on your podcast, are you? I won't talk to competitors.
No. Believe me, you wouldn't want me to do a song. Believe me, in every possible way, you wouldn't want me to do a song. Although, for a year, I will say, I spent a year in Nashville. My daughter was down there, and I spent a year on leave at Vanderbilt, which is in Nashville. And my goal that year was to write some country music songs, but I never did. I should have, but anyway, I didn't. I was too busy. But what I did do when I was younger was I used to work at a science museum, and I would explain. There was an exhibit about electricity, and I do all these fun experiments with hundreds of people, and I do that maybe 8 or 10 times a day. And like vaudeville, it was a good training for not only learning how to explain things, but I got rather bored because I don't like scripts. I never did have a script. So what I did do, which I think maybe is a little bit like what you're trying to do, but it was an area where I could do it, not like songs, is I would ask the audience for 5 words at the beginning of the show. And then I say, okay, I'm going to explain electricity in terms of those 5 words. And it was fun for me because it forced me to think while I was doing it. And on the other hand, as you all know, if you've probably written songs, and I used to work in folk festivals too, and I'd watch people do.
Hey, have you nothing you haven't done?
Well, no, I'm lucky. I used to do a lot of, yeah. I remember once singing along with a guy named John Prine. Yeah.
He's won a Grammy, Heather.
Yeah. Well, no, I didn't win a Grammy. I was nominated for a Grammy.
Sorry. Yeah, top 5.
A big difference. But as Heather, don't worry. As I told Jack, I have no musical ability whatsoever. Sorry.
All right. Well, let's just to finish up here. If you could give us 5 words to include in the song.
Well, for you, let's see, consciousness, because you'll want to have that. That's a hard word to put in a song.
What rhymes with consciousness? I have to check.
Okay. Challenge, acceptance, possibilities for sure, Heather. Nature, questions, and not knowing. Anyway, me too. That's why I do what I do. I love not knowing because it means there's the possibility of learning. That's the biggest mistake that I say parents and teachers and all of us make is being afraid to say I don't know. And I think saying I don't know to a kid is one of the most exciting things you can do, because it means, hey, maybe we can, I don't know, but maybe we can learn about it together. Or maybe no one knows and it's time you started to think about it. But I think we need to do a lot more in the educational system talking about what we don't know.
The unknown unknowns and the...
the unknown. In fact, actually, I'm writing a new book about that, as it turns out. Anyway.
What's the title of that? Maybe we can use that.
Well, I don't know. I don't really know. It's called The Known Unknowns. So what's next? You go back and do your thing, and then later on it comes out? Okay, good. You don't do it in real time. That'd be too much of a challenge. Oh. I will say I watched one of my most exciting experiences in folk music experiences when I worked at something called the Mariposa Folk Festival, which is in Canada, was seeing Steve Goodman and I think David Amram improvise a song, which later on became a really well-known song of Steve Goodman's, and just doing it on stage. It was really amazing. Anyway, I don't know if you know who that is, but Steve, he was a wonderful musician who died. He was actually, he and John Prine were both friends and did a lot together, but he was exactly. And most people think it's Arlo Guthrie. And I remember having a debate. I was I was at a dinner once, and this jazz musician, by the way, a piano player, was playing sitting in New Orleans, and he'd said it was Arlo Guthrie. I went afterwards and said no, it was Steve Goodman. And he didn't believe me, but it was, and that was his. And as I think Chris Christopherson said, that was the best damn train song that was ever written. Anyway, well, good. Well, it's nice to have spent some time with you both virtually. I'll be happy to see the final product of all of this. And I am in awe of the challenge that you have before you. Good. Okay. Well, let me know when it comes out, and it was fun. And that's
Thanks,
what it's
Lawrence.
all about.
Thanks for your time.
Okay. Sure. Okay. Take care. Okay. Bye. Bye.
Is there only what is and not what could be? Is there any such thing as possibility? It's fun not knowing what it's all about, but I sure would like to find out. And what or where exactly is consciousness? Any speculation makes the water muddy, I guess. It's fun not knowing what it's all about, but I sure would like to find out. Every flap of the butterfly's wing is both an answer and a question cooked into the nature of everything. There's an equal mix of beauty and tragedy stored in every moment I'm alive. How could I ever be bored? It's fun not knowing what it's all about, but I sure would like to find out. I'd really, really like to find out. Before I die, I'd like to find out.
Well, thanks so much for agreeing to do this song. We can still, I can send you a recording of the interview, and we can.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah. We can make a song that has to include these 5 words: consciousness, possibilities, nature, questions, not knowing. So, yeah, we'll just brainstorm some ideas. I'll work on something, you work on something, and then see where we go.
After so many years of searching science, countless experiments, and breaking down of elements, of contradictory theories and fantastic formulas, endless equations to get to the truth. The only thing that we can confidently say throughout the ages is that we don't really know what we don't know. We can't even say what we can't see. We found no unknowns, and experiments have shown enough to prove that it is what it is. We can't conceive of new realities or visualize a fraction of what might be. Our imagination fails at application when we think of new possibilities. So much of nature is still conjecture, and every new answer asks 100 other questions. Once everything's disproved, the one thing that's left, the unchanging reality, is that we don't really know what we don't know. We can't even say what we can't see. We found no unknowns, and experiments have shown enough to prove that it is what it is. We can't conceive of new realities or visualize a fraction of what might be. Our course it's becoming, well, different types of nothing. Science is moving, perpetually improving, examining and removing, till we have one unifying thing. And it's we don't really know what we don't know. We can't even say what we can't see. We found known unknowns, and experiments have shown enough to prove that it is what it is. We can't conceive of new realities, or visualize a fraction of what might be. Our imagination fails at application when we think of new possibilities.
Well, we made it through that one. The technical difficulties continued after the interview. Half of Heather's interview didn't record, only had a few clips of her, so I had to edit it together, the ending. And you all know I hate that. So, yeah, then we ended up working on 2 different songs, which you've just heard. But I think they came out really nice, so early stages of collaboration. Hopefully in the next artist it goes more smoothly. Birthing pains. Alright, so you can hear both songs on Spotify, iTunes, Deezer. Please share or get from podsongs.com for $1, which goes to support my artists Maurizio Sanicola, Massimino Vozza and Luigi Falcione, and my researcher Dori Verbo. Please share the podcast itself, write reviews on your podcast app. It really helps to bring more listeners to the show. Thanks again. See you next time.